Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. Big neighbors' drive to eliminate the secret ballot in union elections came back to Capitol Hill this week as the so-called Employee Free Choice Act was introduced in both houses of Congress. The bill, which would allow unions to gain representation simply by showing cards signed by a majority of workers, has business groups united in opposition. So labor chiefs are putting on the brass knuckles, threatening companies with government retaliation if they don't stop lobbying against it. Joining the panel this week, Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, assistant editorial page editor James Freeman, Washington columnist Kim Strassel, and senior editorial page writer Colin Levy. Kim, I've never seen business as united against any legislation, at least not in 20 or 30 years. Explain to our viewers why they're so opposed, how this would work.
Well, there's basically two aspects to this bill. One, as you mentioned, has to do with secret elections. And what it would change is instead of having secret elections and going and voting your conscience as to whether or not you want to join a union, you would have to go and sign a card. And this would be a sort of ongoing process. And when unions finally got more than 50% of workers who'd sign this card, then they would get a union. That's one part of it. The second part of it has to do with what's known as mandatory arbitration. It would say that any newly created union, if they were having difficulty coming to a first contract with their employer, it would get tossed to some sort of federal arbitrator who would make a decision about the contract.
And that second part,
all of this is
go ahead.
Yes.
I mean, and that second part in particular would put unions in a driver's seat when it comes to being able to negotiate a contract, because if they can't settle after 120 days, unions would have incentives to run out the clock, and then this arbitrator would settle in between whatever the two offers were. James, I think this is the biggest. This would be the biggest change in union law in 60 years. Why are you? So this is labor's number one priority.
Huge, and bringing out the brass knuckles. The reason they're trying to stop this advertising and lobbying campaign is because it's working. This is really bad politics, saying you want to take away the secret ballot. And I have to believe if there's one vote where Mitch McConnell can hold his caucus,
he's the Republican minority leader.
And so then you look at Democrats. This is a very tough vote, especially for moderate Southern Democrats, to say we're going to take away secret ballot, or in the arbitration setting, we're going to let the government set pay and benefits.
Colin, what are unions doing here to get businesses to stop lobbying against it?
Well, it's a classic case where they're really using their toughest tactics to push their legislative agenda. They've actually written a letter, a group of unions led by the Service Employees International Union wrote a letter a few weeks ago to Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner suggesting that any banks or companies that receive funds from the Troubled Asset Relief Program shouldn't be able to lobby. So
and threatening Geithner and saying to Geithner, look, you should cut these folks off if they keep lobbying against it. And they mentioned specifically the Principal Financial Group out of Des Moines, which had been playing a role against this. Is this kosher? Can you do this?
Well, I mean, this is something that's a complete double standard by the union, because the unions every year receive millions of dollars in grants from agencies that they lobby. So it's really a case of the pot and the kettle here.
Well, I think the fact that, as we're describing it here, so much of this rubs people the wrong way. First of all, the card check is a union organizer actually going up to some guy and say, hey, you want to join the union and sign this card?
And just so people understand, typically you would be able to make that decision in private.
Yeah.
But if they come up to you and say, will you sign this card, and you don't do it, there's a form of very visible peer pressure and union pressure.
I would say so.
Put the arm around you and say, hey, Dan, you're going to sign or not?
But the second point, beyond that, if you join union, then a certain percentage of your paycheck will be taken out for union dues that go for political organizing.
Sure.
There's an element of desperation here. The unions are faced with economic reality. They're in a global economy. Wages are competitive now, and it's very difficult for them to maintain those wage scales. And to take these steps shows just how desperate they are. The Chamber of Commerce business is going to go to the mattresses. They're going to make big ad buys. They're going to explain this to the American people. And as we were just suggesting, it's going to be a very difficult vote, I think, at crunch time in Congress. They'll have to go to their compromise solution.
Sorry, I was just going to say, too, this is really a case where unions are trying to take the opportunity of a down economy and when companies are sort of unpopular to push their, to reverse the trend of declining unionization. Unions used to be about 20% of the economy back in of the workforce back in 1980, and they're down to 12% now. So they're seeing a small uptick in that regard, and that's what they're going for, while business is sort of on the defensive.
Kim, which Senate Democrats are going wobbly, if any?
There are a number of them. I mean, first of all, the one Republican who voted for this back in 2007, Arlen Specter, his backing away. But you've got, for instance, two of them, Blanche Lincoln, Mark Pryor, both Democrats from Arkansas. Walmart's in their state. People are very worried about what this would do to the economic performance of Walmart if card check were to go through. You've got some of the new Colorado senators, Senator Bennett, Senator Udall, who are on the fence. You've got some other red state Democrats that are very concerned. It's important, they just introduced this legislation this week. Last time around, they had 46 co-sponsors in the Senate. This time, they've got 40.
All right. Well, President Obama 10 days ago said it's going to pass, so we're going to have a big brawl on this one. All right. Still ahead, the Bernie Madoff plea, lessons for investors and government investigators when we come back.